So I want to invite you into a conversation today with a couple who came all the way from several states away to do business with Southeastern Fertility, a long infertility journey as well, almost a decade. Rachel and Rollin Mays are my guests here on the Hope, Faith, and Infertility podcast, coming to you from Southeastern Fertility in Knoxville, Tennessee, southeasternfertility.org for more information. I'm Mark Mellinger, your host. So let's start here. Talk about when you two got married. Was infertility a thought for you back then?
So I think when we first got married, based on my personality, I kind of always imagined worst case scenarios. So I remember because we had been married for about 4 years when we started trying to get pregnant. And I remember there was that thought that crossed into my head about what if like it takes a long time, or what if we can't? And so I'm just going to keep sharing, my journey. But, kind of that first year, there was always this sense of, I think I would reason with myself like, oh, sometimes it takes a year. And so kind of like holding out with this hope of it would happen eventually. And then I remember once we hit the 1 year mark, we went and saw my doctor to talk about it. And I think that's when it really sunk in, like, this is not happening. And I know for me, I can struggle with wanting control, and I have more of like an anxious personality. And so there was kind of this dynamic in me coming out of like, I was very fearful and had this desire to kind of try and like, okay, well, let's just control things. Let's figure it out. Let's make it happen. And so we we went to see my doctor, and then she recommended us to see a fertility specialist. And then we kind of went to one locally and kind of started pursuing fertility treatment. And then kind of what happened is I think we both realized like we weren't really on the same page. I think I kind of realized like I was kind of doing this out of like control, anxiety. And I know Rollin can kind of share where he was at in a few minutes, but I remember kind of hitting this point of realizing like we just didn't feel peace to keep going in like pursuing fertility treatment. And so we kind of just paused on that. So this is back in 2015. So this is like about a year into our journey. And I think like that at that point, I kind of really went through just a season of deep grief and mourning, and kind of like asking those questions like, God, like, where are you? I really struggled feeling abandoned. And so I think what was actually happening is like, it was actually God's like kindness was probably just revealing like some deeper questions I had towards God of like, wait, does he see me? Is he with me? And so kind of like 2015 to 2016 was kind of a year of like really wrestling with the Lord, and kind of, I think just like grieving and just feeling just just the pain of like, this is not happening. I think also in that season, in our church, in our community, we probably saw, there's probably at least 5 couples that were peers with us all get pregnant. And then we're just kind of here like, okay, this is not happening. We don't know what. And I think in that space, like I really struggled feeling pretty isolated. If you've walked through infertility, you kind of understand it. There's like something about it that you feel really ashamed. If you haven't gone through it, it's hard to understand, but it's like, it's just there's something that there's like, I don't know what it is, but I know I really struggled feeling like a sense of shame and like a loneliness and isolation. And kind of what happened was in the summer of 2016, so now we're 2 years into kind of just this road. And we were actually spending the summer in Colorado with kind of part of our jobs. We were kind of helping run a summer discipleship program for college students. And I remember getting to a point in my relationship with God where I just kind of came to a point of surrender, of just really asking him, like, if this is not going to happen, like if this is something we need to let go, can you just tell us? I think kind of just coming to that point of like, yeah, if we need to let this go, like I'll do it. And kind of through it's, it's kind of hard to explain, but just through just different things that happen, like I really felt this sense in my heart, like this impression from God, like he was basically encouraging me to like not stop asking for it. And I kind of really felt like he told us like that we would have biological children, which is kind of a scary thing of like, wait, how do you discern that? And then how do you walk that out? But I really felt like almost like he was saying, like, I want you to keep asking, like, don't stop hoping for it. And so then and I think in that moment, and there were other things that happened where I don't know how to explain it, but I think I really just had just this moment or just series of moments of understanding and really believing like, wait, God was like with me in it, that I struggled to feel like forgotten, but I just for somehow like I knew deep down like he was with us. He saw us. He was doing something, like we couldn't understand what was happening, but he was moving in it. And I just remember that like just totally changed the game for me. And I remember from that point on, there was no guarantee moving forward. It's like, okay, I really felt like God, like impressed this on my heart, but I don't know what's going to happen. But like, I knew like he was like very good. It's like, I just remember moving forward, just really believing like whatever happens, like he's really good to us and I can trust him. And so then it became this, I think a journey of like, what does it mean to kind of, I think, persevere in prayer. I came back from that summer kind of, with two things, this sense of to keep like praying for it. And then I also really felt this sense of wanting to just invite people into this journey with us. I really felt like God was like calling me to like radical vulnerability and transparency. I think out of this place of just feeling like, man, I don't want to let this isolate me and Rollin. And so like that was kind of a turning point in just really telling a lot of our friends and family, like, we're walking through this, like, will you pray with us? And so it kind of became a journey since 2016 of just like walking with like our friends and family, them just kind of, praying for us and just kind of engaging with how we were doing in it. And I think like, it was kind of there's this tension in my heart of like really praying boldly and continue to persevere. And at the same time, like be really surrendered in it, because there was no guarantee, even though I kind of felt this sense like this was what God was calling us to do. It's like, well, it could not happen. I could be wrong. And coming to a point of, if I was wrong or if we never have children, it's okay. Like coming to a place of really being able to believe and see that, okay, God is like enough for us. He's going to take care of us. Like he's like the real reward in this life. And so in that, there's kind of this freedom of like, man, I'm going to like go for it and be bold with the Lord and continue to ask and believe, but then also like be content with kind of where we were at.
And that is, I think, really instructive, Rachel. That is not a place that everybody who's encountering infertility gets to, or anybody who's going through any sort of major life trial gets to. But as a believer, I think you have to get to that place where you say, there is this thing that I want, and it seems like a good desire, and I want God to give it to me. I'm going to ask. My impression is that he also wants the same thing, and that's why I laughed a little bit when you were telling your story. Sometimes when Christians think God has spoken to them, that just can't be questioned. In their minds. I know you're not saying it like that. You held it with a very open, humble hand. We can't always be sure our impressions from God are 100% correct, but nonetheless, that's what you felt, and it seemed to make sense. But yet, you were willing to say, if this never happens, I can put it on the cross, and I can accept somehow, as hard as it seems, that what God has for me is better for me ultimately.
Yes. Yeah.
And I love how you said he's the reward. The relationship with him is the reward. And I want to dive into that a little bit later, because that's also a truth that a lot of Christians are eluded by, and we all can be there sometimes when life wears us down. But Rollin, I'm interested in hearing from your perspective. She mentioned that you guys were on different pages at first.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I didn't think about this coming into this podcast, but when you asked us that question, my mind actually went back all the way to 2008, which is when Rachel and I met. And we met as students at the same summer discipleship program that she referenced in 2016, that later in 2016, we were staffing in the context of our college ministry.
I should mention, by the way, that you guys do college ministry down in Texas. I said at the beginning you came from several states away. I didn't say where. So Texas, nobody loves their state like a Texan.
Yeah, that's right. And so what's really crazy in our story is that the first serious conversation that Rachel and I ever had was centered around Isaiah 54. And I was really obsessed with Isaiah 54 at that time. And the first line of Isaiah 54 is, "Sing, O barren woman." It says, "Sing, O barren woman who has not borne." And then there's this incredible series of promises out of that. You know, it's like, "For the children of the desolate one will be more than the children of her who is married." And you know, God was speaking that to the nation of Israel, and even specifically like the city of Jerusalem, which was like this mother of the family of God that had been desolated as a result of the exile and sin. And well, really, as a student, what had caught my heart with that passage was this idea that God was saying basically to sing out of the very place where you feel cursed and lost. And I remember talking Rachel's ear off about that, because I was just that idea is like a paradigm for life. Like, how can I take the area where I feel cursed or lost and respond to it by like breaking forth in joyful singing? Like, that's what the Isaiah 54, it's like a command: "Sing, O barren woman." So that passage ended up being read at our wedding, and our officiant, his little sermonette, Rachel's older brother, was based on Isaiah 54. And I had always thought of that in a very like, almost like a paradigm for thinking about life. The specifics of being barren were not something that I anticipated. Once that became part of our story, actually that passage at times to me felt almost like a cruel irony, like a trick that God had played on us, that we'd kind of been brought together. And because it's we would still say it's in some ways our passage. It's a very significant thing, even in the context of our marriage. And, you know, I really wrestled with that of my sense of the character of God and the goodness of God, almost like, did you set us up for this, you know? And whereas Rachel, you know, she mentioned that her tendency might be toward control, mine can be toward passivity. And so my way of dealing with difficult things in life is to kind of have a roll with the punches mindset and attitude. Like, I know difficult things are going to happen. I'm not going to ignore or like deny that they're difficult, but I'm not going to try to fight them or sort of overcome them. I'm just going to kind of accept this is how it is. And so when we started experiencing infertility, that was my very strong instinctive response. It was painful and scary, but for me, the easiest way to deal with that was just to kind of say, okay, this is just reality. Let's not fight it. And Rachel described how we went through this process of kind of starting to pursue taking some initial steps towards getting help with fertility. And what ended up stopping us is that I came to a point where I realized, wait, I'm not actually present in this. I'm almost just doing this because Rachel wants to do it. And it's not coming out of a unified place in our marriage where we're together feeling a sense before the Lord of like, yes, this is what we want to do. We have freedom to do, or he's inviting us to do it, however you want to phrase it. I just realized like I was just kind of along for the ride, and that was wrong. I couldn't just be along for the ride.
So freeze it for just a second. I
Yes.
want to stop you. I mean, I can't, and you can continue in a second because I want to hear it. But I mean, I just want to camp out on this for a second. Infertility is so hard on marriages, and I'm trying to envision this in my mind's eye. Did this cause? First of all, you're trying to be a good husband, and you've got a wife who's very concerned about this, so you got to hold that. At the same time, you're not feeling what she's feeling. Like you said, you didn't feel like you were a part of it. This was her dream, not yours. I'm putting words in your mouth, but something to that effect. Did this cause significant conflict in your marriage?
Well, I think, it's kind of interesting. It's almost like because I chose to be passive, it was more of like conflict avoidant than conflict engaged. It was like I deeply wanted to be a father. I mean, I had felt that desire. I remember in high school, like I would say this thing, like I remember telling my parents, like, I want to have 4 to 8 kids. I remember that's for particular thing, which is kind of an embarrassing thing to even share in this context. But it's like, I loved that idea of being a father. So it was a very difficult thing for me, and I wanted it. But the pain of that, of not having what I want, it was just easier for me to resolve almost by just kind of resigning myself to it. Like, this is just the way it is. Don't fight it. And so I actually think we've had plenty of very significant sources of conflict in our marriage. One of the kind of crazy things about this aspect of our story is I don't know if we really ever have had really deep conflict related to this, because part of what ends up happening in this story is there's kind of what Rachel described happened in her. It was very miraculous. I don't know how else to describe it. It was a sense of there are like moments in her life where she's just been fundamentally changed. And the moment that she described happening in 2016, where she kind of yielded, kind of surrendered, and was like, God, I can give this up. And then she felt this sense of God saying, no, I want you to keep asking. And then also to be vulnerable and to really engage our community in terms of praying for us, is that she really, it's one of the real fundamental changes in who she was as a person. And one of the things that happened out of that is that she completely gave up any attempt to try to control it in any way.
How does that happen?
I don't know.
Yeah, it's very,
yeah.
I try to, because I know Rachel really well, it's one of those things that when I try to explain it to people, all I can say is it's basically a miracle. So what ended up happening in our journey is that I had been in this kind of passive, resigned place, really just tagging along with Rachel because she was just desperate to try to get an answer or solution. And then she went through this very deep transformation in the summer of 2016. And out of that, she just gave up all of her control. And really what she even shared with me was like, Ron, I'm just good to do whatever you feel comfortable with. And she meant it. There was never, I can tell you from 2016 through 2023, I never felt pressure from her, ever. And
That's
it wasn't
wonderful.
like she was like repressing, you know what I mean? Like you can kind of fake like, oh, just do what you want. Like we're okay.
Oh yeah.
Fake that for a while, even convince yourself in your own mind for a while. It was not fake. It was a very real, deep, lasting freedom. And there is no explanation for it outside of the Holy Spirit transforming, doing something transformative in her heart. And then I would say through the space that created, where she really was yielded to God, and then even just really yielded in the context of like, Ron, I'm just okay with like whatever you feel comfortable with, is that it created this space where God could do a work that was going to be transforming me. So it's kind of like I was behind her in that of like, she had to go through her work in order to create the space that God could do something really deep in me. And really the invitation that I ultimately felt And it just took me years to get there because it was so easy for me to stay in the place of passivity and not knowing, I didn't even want to know why we might be struggling with infertility, because the possibility, like the range of answers to why we might struggle with infertility was just like, I don't even want to know. I just want to remain in the dark. Ignorance is bliss. I mean, not really bliss, but it's better than the alternative. And so I think what was happening is that as God was growing me as a man in the context of our marriage and this journey, and the freedom that she had gave me the space to really come to terms with, like, man, I have this desire for children. And I think instead of being in this resigned place, I want to engage with that. And I want to take the risks with Rachel related to even figuring out why we might be struggling with infertility. Mm-hmm. And so I could go into more detail about what that ended up looking like for me, but I think that that's kind of the overall arc of my story.
Yeah, and this is just fascinating. I love hearing it, because what God did was really he brought you to each individually in different ways to places that you were uncomfortable going, places of the heart where you were uncomfortable going at one point. And that's just a wonderful work of grace. And it doesn't happen. You hear people say people change, but not much. And that's usually true. But this is really hopeful, because it shows that in the spirit, people can change. And I'm so glad that you two did. I mean, you did end up deciding to pursue, okay, what's causing this? What do we want to do? How did you get to the point where you decided, okay, this is how we're gonna plunge ahead? And eventually, of course, you found this little clinic in Tennessee that that you ended up going to a whole heck of a lot.
Yeah. You sure, Kylie?
Yeah. So I think I went through these stages of even realizing, like, I needed to I said engage. Part of what that even meant for me was I need to intentionally bring this issue in our lives to mind, as opposed to just kind of setting it aside or forgetting it in the context of other sort of higher urgency stressors. I need to bring this to mind, and in my relationship with God, engage him about it, and do this in my relationship with other people. So I kind of had this sort of set of goals I went through of, like, okay, I'm just going to get more intentional about this. I'm going to measure success for myself in the sense of, am I thinking about it more often? Am I praying about it a little more often? Am I talking about it a little more often? And as I went through that process, I remember a moment where I shared with some other leaders in our church, and one of the men approached me afterwards, and he was specifically talking about some of the fears that I had related to even getting a diagnosis of our infertility. He told me it's better to essentially know something that's painful in the light than sort of hide from the truth in the darkness. So you might find out something that's really painful, but it's better to know that as opposed to try to seek refuge in ignorance. And so that really started to kind of like simmer and work on me. And I just came to a point where I thought, no, I'm ready to move forward with this. And so, yeah, we did some, this was back, was it
2021? Yeah.
2021. I remember telling Rachel, we usually do, like, every semester, we'll do like a little weekend getaway. And I kind of stored up in my brain, on this weekend getaway, I'm going to bring up to Rachel, I think I'm ready to go for this. And I brought it up with her. And then we just went through a series of steps over 6 months, about 6 months, starting with kind of a primary care doctor, and trying to get a diagnosis, find out why are we not having babies. And what's sort of fascinating about that is that process ended with us having undiagnosed infertility. So we still have no idea. And in a strange way, that was actually kind of a relief. I was deeply worried that I was the problem. That's what's going to happen. We're going to do these tests, and we're going to find out, I'm not producing sperm or whatever it may be.
That was probably your biggest fear all along.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. And so in some weird way, that was kind of a relief. People take that kind of information differently. For us, it was almost a weird relief. And then from there, you know, we're talking with the doctors that we were with at that point. I think it was just your OBGYN. And
Yeah.
so then we did 4 IUIs locally, like in Texas, and went through the process that anybody who's done any fertility treatment knows, which is that you do it, and then for 2 weeks, it's like your life hangs in the balance.
Yes.
There are 2 futures that stand in front of you, and you have literally no idea which way your life's going to go. You're imagining either, and then you go through this process of, in a moment, you find out, and one of those futures is gone.
Mm-hmm.
And so for us, you know, in that context, those 4 IUIs, it was 4 stages of those 2-week periods, and then finding out. And then part of what our story in this, like Rachel really let out in this sense of, we are going to involve our community. We are going to go the complete opposite direction of shame and of hiding. And so part of what was really painful about that, because that may sound really nice in theory, but part of what was really painful, and we don't have any regrets, but part of what was painful about it is that every time we would get bad news, we did an IUI and we're not pregnant, we would have all these people that were waiting with us, and then we had to be the bearers of bad news to them. And and it felt like, almost like, sometimes I think even with the way that we engage community, like we could almost feel guilt, like we're putting you guys, like, I mean, people were choosing to invest in us. It wasn't like we were compelling them in some kind of way. They cared about us, but it's almost like we are going through this roller coaster, but now because you care about us and because we've invited you into our story, you're going through a roller coaster, and you're having to deal with all this like pain and disappointment, and even questions related to God and why is this happening, and so that would add to the sense of pain even when we would get the bad news about the IUIs. And so that gets us most of the way to how we ended up at Southeastern. I don't know if you want us to keep going. I think Rachel could maybe share about how we ended up.
Yeah. Go ahead, Rachel. Interested in hearing that.
So what's funny is, I think from the start of even when we started struggling with infertility, I always had this fear in the back of my mind, like, what if it comes down to someone tells us like IVF is your next option? And for some reason, IVF just felt pretty daunting and scary. So it's like, even when we started pursuing, you know, IUIs, I remember my OB, I think after the second IUI, she said, hey, just be thinking about, you know, IVF. And so what we did is, you know, we did our 3rd IUI. It was summer of 2022. And then we went on a big road trip. So we had kind of space, a couple months to really just process, like, do we want to go for a 4th IUI? Should we think about seeing a fertility specialist? And so we kind of decided, let's just move forward with both. So we kind of moved forward with doing the 4th IUI, which resulted, you know, in, you know, not working. And we had scheduled an appointment with a fertility specialist, you know, in the area. And I still remember thinking, like, when we go, like, oh, like, what's going to happen? And I remember when we had that appointment, it felt like a huge victory for both of us, because it wasn't
just to have the appointment.
Yeah, just even having the appointment, like seeing an actual fertility specialist, because previously we had just been working with an OB. And I remember in the appointment, I mean, she basically told us my worst fear. She said, you know, or one of my fears, she said, well, I think based on looking at your history, like IVF would be the next step. And I remember it was about a year ago at this time, because I think it was like September 30th, we had the appointment. And I remember coming home and like that night and waking up the next day, realizing like that fear I felt towards IVF, I didn't feel it. Like, I didn't feel like afraid. And if anything, like, I actually felt this sense of peace and excitement about doing it, which just, I think, really surprised me, because I think there's ways in which I think I probably kind of had a critical view of IVF. I think what I believed, and God totally humbled me in that. I think I like believe like, oh, that's just too much control.
Yeah.
you know, kind of like
Sure.
I just was a little judgmental. And like you realize when you're in it, you're like, no, you don't have control. There you can do certain things, but really when it comes down to it, you don't have control. But yeah, I felt like God like really humbled me in it. And it just, I don't know how to describe it other than it just felt like there was an open door. It felt like God had like opened this door to kind of explore IVF. And so then as we were starting to explore it, you know, I was kind of rethinking kind of our appointment with the fertility specialist, and even kind of the process she described, and the things they do, and things weren't adding up to me. Like it was kind of like, wait, that doesn't seem, it just felt like it was hitting on like just our kind of our morals and what we believe about like the sanctity of life. And so then there was this dilemma that it was like, okay, well, I feel like we kind of felt this sense like God was opening a door to explore, but ooh, how are we going to do this in a way that feels like is right, you know, and like honoring God and protecting life? And I kind of just felt like this sense like God was like encouraging us, like he was basically saying like, oh, I trust you guys to walk through this. So then it was like, well, what do we do? I don't, like, we just felt this sense of we couldn't work with that fertility specialist. And so I think then it kind of felt a little overwhelming, like, well, how could we do this like in a way that feels like is right based on what we believe? And I remember you had had like a doctor's appointment with his primary care. And I remember you kind of asked your doctor for if he knew anyone, and he didn't know anyone, but he just said, I remember him saying like, you just need to make sure you're on the same page with whoever you work with. You just got to make sure you're on the same page. So it just felt like, okay, I don't know what we're going to do. So I just started doing like different like research. And, you know, if you Google Christian IVF, y'all are like the first people that pop up. And what's funny is like the first few times I Googled it, I would always like skip below. I don't know why. I have no idea why. I just kind of like skip down. I would never like look at your website, and I was like looking at other things. And then I think I finally looked at your website, and y'all had recently posted, you had something on there that was kind of an explanation of Roe v. Wade, because this was like right after Roe v. Wade was overturned.
Right.
And I just remember reading kind of y'all's explanation, and I was like, wow, this is like exactly what I'd want. Like the things y'all do, this is like perfect. And then like, you know, then I did the research and I was like, oh, you guys are in Tennessee. Okay. So, so here's the thing with like Rollin and I is like, we're big like adventures. Like part of like our journey of 9 years of infertility is we really lived up those years. We did so many road trips. We did like some pretty wild things. You know, my family actually lives in Illinois, so we're accustomed to just doing long trips. So for some reason, Tennessee did not feel like too much. It just felt like, oh, is this just another adventure, but a different adventure? And so, you know, we did the 15-minute
The free
telemeeting.
15-minute call. Yeah. With
Yes,
Dr.
we did
Gordon.
that.
Right.
I remember it was like right before Thanksgiving with Dr. Gordon, and it just felt really encouraging. We're like, wow, it just felt like the door continued to stay open. And then
Well, one of the things I was going to say is that part of the process for me at every stage was I couldn't make a plan for or anticipate where the story might be going. I just had to make a decision to take the step right in front of us. And so that was part of what it was kind of like, that's what I could do. I didn't have the courage to commit to like, we're going to do IVF, but I could commit to, let's do a free 15-minute consultation with Dr. Gordon. And then with no strings attached, we may not do anything after that. We may just do that. And so then it's kind of like, take the step right in front of us and then learn from that, be able to go, okay, what did we just learn in the step that we took? What are our options now? And then take one more step. And so that's part of, as I was kind of walking through my own fear of like, part of the way I would say it is like, I know pain and difficulty is just part of life, but choosing to do something that could be really painful and difficult, I'll generally pass. I mean, it's like there's enough
Yeah.
challenges that are just going to happen.
Right.
And so that to move into this space where it felt like I was risking my heart at such a level, all I could do was take one step at a time. And in a sense, say, Rach, I can't plan on or commit to anything beyond that, but let's just do this. And so I felt like yeah, that
That's
approach
really helpful. Yeah.
yeah, allowed me to keep engaging. Um, but we always felt this sense of, we don't know where this is going. We're not going to make assumptions. We're not going to kind of get locked in on like a plan of like several steps. We're just going to take the one step in front of us. And that's like I said, literally the only way I could have done it. I couldn't have done it any other way.
That's great. And she went at your pace. So how did you finally get locked in? I mean, eventually you had to lock in on a plan.
So we did an initial appointment in January. It worked out that, we were driving up to Illinois for Christmas to see my family, and it just worked out timing wise. Oh, on the way back, why don't we just swing by?
Sure.
It's a little out of the way, but like, it's its own trip, and I don't know. I remember
It is the one step at a time. It was
Yeah.
kind of like, I think that's even, it's like we did the 15-minute consultation, and it was like, okay, the next step would actually be to visit Southeastern and kind of do a more in-depth conversation and a couple initial tests. And so then it was like, do we want to do that?
Yeah.
Yep. Okay, we can do that. And if we do that, we're not committing to the whole thing. It's just like, we're just taking it that one step. And it really worked out beautifully timing wise that, like I said, we were able to kind of partner it with a trip to see family that we were already doing anyways. And so then we did that visit in January, and then we came away from that. We sort of reflected on what it meant. And
I remember feeling really encouraged. I remember when we were driving, it was like the next morning, we were kind of driving back to Texas, just really feeling this sense, like just a lot of peace. And I just felt a lot of encouragement from the Lord, like, oh, that we could do this. We did go through a process right after where we, just because it felt like it was a really big decision. So we, asked some of our close friends and all of our family members. We just talked to them about it and kind of got their input.
I was gonna say, I think for us, part of the feeling was, there are a lot of just ethical complexities related to IVF.
There are, no doubt.
And I think part of what we felt like was like our priority, we would love to have children. And if God wanted to use IVF to give us children, we wanted to walk down that road. But if it was children through IVF or doing what we felt like was honoring God, which if that had meant not doing IVF, like if we arrived at a point where we thought, man, we can't wrap our minds around feeling really confident before God that this is a good decision that honors him and honors life and, honors humanity, is made in his image, then we're not going to do it. And so it was really significant for us. And I'm really, really glad that we did this, that in the process, like Rachel mentioned, after that appointment in January, before we actually did our first cycle of IVF, is that we invited our pastors and their wives. We just laid it in front of them and said, what do you guys think about this? Do y'all have any concerns? Do y'all see red flags? And then we one by one went through every adult couple in our immediate families, who are all followers of Jesus. We went through and just had the same kind of conversation, said, here's what we're thinking about doing, but we don't want to do it if it's wrong. And we trust you guys. Do y'all have concerns about this? And that process was really important for us because we wanted, if we were going to do it, to do it with a very high degree of confidence. Not that anybody can have perfect certainty of like, I know for sure that what I'm doing is right, but just in the sense of that we could say, man, we went through what we knew how to go through in terms of seeking counsel, doing research, searching our own hearts, doing it over a period of time, not rushing into something, so that whatever decision we end up with at the end of this, it's one that we can feel confident in based on the process we went through, and as a kind of an expression, a process that was an expression of God, we trust you to lead in this. Yeah.
It's a great takeaway. And again, yeah, have a circle of advisors. That's really smart. Never rush into this, especially if you have reservations about the complexities of it, like Rollin and Rachel have said. So you did obviously end up deciding to move forward with it, and talk about what God brought from your journey with us.
Yeah. Well, we ended up doing 2 cycles of Mini-Stim IVF. And so the first cycle, we went out in March. And that was that first cycle resulted in a really early miscarriage. I think you would call it a miscarriage. I mean, it was like I got a low positive,
Yeah,
but
maybe an ectopic. Mhm.
yeah, that was a really it was a very painful
Well,
end.
it was a painful end. The experience in Tennessee and with Southeastern was really special.
Oh yeah.
We also had Rachel's parents came and spent part of the time with us just to support us, and that was a very special time with
That's
her
great.
family. But yeah, the actual, I think there's no other way to say it. The actual day of the embryo transfer was probably one of the more traumatic experiences that we have had as a couple, because we went into it thinking, well, even if this transfer is unsuccessful, we'll probably have little embryo babies to come back for, based on what we had found out about the fertilization numbers. And when we came in that day, we ended up finding out like that really we only had one embryo that made sense to transfer, and that maybe 2, but they thought even that second one may have already stopped growing. And so that was really, it wasn't like there was anything wrong in that. It was just based on our assumptions or expectations. We expected that we would have kind of this almost, we just didn't expect that in the range. For whatever reason, it just was not in our brains that was a possibility. And so to find that out was very devastating.
And you found it out the day you were here.
Yeah, because that's just the way it works.
That's just how it is, right?
Yeah,
right.
that's how the
and that
process
happens.
goes.
Those are very sad times.
Yeah, and so it was very, very painful. And I remember we almost right away believed, even before we found out that Rachel wasn't pregnant, we thought this isn't going to work. It's like it's like the script flipped on us in this moment. And we went from, man, God, this has been such a beautiful experience. We've loved being in Southeastern. We've loved being in Tennessee in late March, early April.
Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, nice time of year. Like everything just felt like it had been a great experience to wait, this is like devastating. This isn't going to work. And I remember even Rachel brought up that same day, like, well, if it doesn't work, like maybe we can come back. And I literally had to say, I wasn't mad, but I just had to say, I can't even talk about that.
Yeah.
I can't even think about doing that.
One step at a time, right?
Yes. And I think even for me, like over the next few days, even before we found out that she wasn't pregnant, like I said, we were both operating under the conviction almost that she wasn't.
Well, I think part of it is when you struggle with infertility for so long, it's almost hard to believe.
Yeah.
Like I think it was partly that too.
And I was going through a process internally of like, man, God, I feel like you brought me to this point of like leaning into something that was very scary and difficult for me. And I kind of sensed, even in the first few days after that first cycle ended, I felt like he was kind of indicating that he was going to invite us to come back for a second time. And that was very upsetting to me. I actually felt angry at God. It felt like the analogy I've used is I've told people, it was like I just climbed one of the biggest mountains of my life. Just to get here was a huge mountain. I summited it, and then God beamed me down to the bottom and said, climb it again. and I felt like, how could you do this? Like, how it's like you're asking too much. Like, this is like you're asking too much of us. You're asking too much of me. And I think through that process, I actually got to a moment, the way I would phrase it is almost the sense was as if God was asking me, do you believe that I only write good stories? And the implication was, if you do believe that, then you'll follow me wherever I lead. Even if it doesn't make sense, and even if it feels terrifying, you will follow me because you'll believe I'm only going to write a good story. And I didn't mean good story in the sense of one that would end with a pregnancy. I meant good in the sense of whatever, in the context of God's providence, is the way that he wants to move in this world through us, through our lives, in us. And really what it was a very deep moment of being invited to surrender to him. Of like, to say, yes, God, I believe you only write good stories, which if that's true, then if you're asking us to go back for a second time, I'll do it. And part of what I can even say in that is that, we had by that point a very large community, probably in the hundreds.
Yeah, we would have friends that would say, oh yeah, my mom's Bible study is pretty great.
Yeah, because we were updating like a blog, and we had actually we had asked people to help us financially going into the first one. And so we had this huge community of people that was with us and had been praying for us. And I felt like that moment of surrender to God, of saying, I believe you only write good stories, so I'll follow you. It was like something, and I'm using this word very intentionally, it was like he was birthing something in me, like a level of submission that felt almost deeper than there's just a very few moments in my life that I could say I felt like that level of like, okay, God, I submit to you. And it felt like a very direct product of people praying for us. And it was as if they had been praying that we would have kids. They would have been praying that God would bless the IVF process. But like part of the way that God was answering that was by, in a sense, you'd say, conceiving and birthing something in us. And in that moment, in me, that was changing me. And it's part of like, I think what even once I got to that point, I was able to actually get really excited about going into a second IVF cycle, because what I felt like was, I was like, God, I know regardless of whether this ends in children, you are doing something deeply significant in our lives and deeply good in our lives. And I'm experiencing that. And like I said, in the context of this community of people that it felt like he had raised up that were praying for us. And so that's what ended up kind of, on my end, turning me toward the corner. I think Rachel was always open to going a second time, but helped me turn the corner towards, we can do this again.
Yeah. Yeah. I had felt like even when we were in the first cycle, like thinking, okay, this isn't too bad. Like I had always been scared of the needles, all of that, and just realizing like, this isn't too bad. So I remember, the day after the transfer, when we knew the first cycle, when we knew most likely, what am I trying to say? When we knew most likely that the rest of our embryos had arrested, I remember just feeling this sense of like, I would do it again. Like just feeling, so I felt like an openness, but just kind of like an open-handedness kind of, because I just knew, again, if we're going to do it, like we're going to do it together on the same page. And part of it is I remember just asking the Lord, because, I know the biggest thing, the biggest hurdle probably for us, like coming back, would have been like the finances of like, how is this going to work? And I just remember that morning, like the morning after the transfer, just, I think just asking God, I'm like, man, I'm open to doing this, but like, we're just going to need you to provide somehow. And it was crazy because later that day, we basically, it's like God answered that prayer. And there was this supernatural just provision financially that if we wanted to like go for it again, it was kind of like, there was almost like an open door.
Awesome. And so then you were able to come back for the second try. Did it feel better the second day? The second time?
Well, I think partly the second cycle, because we knew what to expect. It was way more relaxing, because I think, but I mean, both times I will just say, like, I absolutely love the staff at Southeastern Fertility. Like I was, even I was like thinking about, I had to adjust to when I was basically graduated from Southeastern Fertility. Like I've been so spoiled that like, I can send my nurse an email and she'll just email me within a few hours. So there's just a level of like, it's just very like personal. Like there's just, I don't know how to describe it. And there's just a level of care. And I just like really appreciate just how, just even like with Dr. Gordon, like, just being like a follower of Jesus, and like, it's like, well, what other like clinic can you go to and they'll like pray with you? So it was like a dream come true. And so, yeah, I feel the second cycle almost felt like just really fun. I don't know how, I know that sounds really strange, but it just felt like.
Well, we had a sense too, we felt going into the second cycle, this is the end of this part of the journey.
Yep.
Yeah.
I'd actually gotten to a point where I actually felt very strongly we would get pregnant. I was like, I could be wrong, but I had a very deep sense of, I think we're going to get pregnant. I also felt like even if we don't, I think this will be the end of our journey with fertility treatment.
Mm-hmm.
It felt like a fullness of time moment, like just one of those things where, and it was interesting in our own individual ways. Rachel and I both kind of got to that point where we just really realized, like, whether there are children or not at the end of this second cycle just feels like this is the end of a chapter. And so I think that gave a lot of peace going into it too. It just felt like, okay, yeah, this is it. Like I said, for me, definitely felt like God got me here. He got us here. He provided for us in ways that we couldn't have imagined to even make it possible. And I think he's going to give us a kid at the end of this. But even if he doesn't, like, there's just this sense of very deep gratitude for the whole story, and just seeing his hand in our lives for good, period.
Well, the way the changes that he's cultivated in your own souls, the community, the level of community that he's given you, there are so many good marks of God all over your story. You're right. I mean, regardless of the result. And so many of us, such a key point that God only writes good stories. I mean, we believe that, and yet I would say most of us spend our lives negotiating for a different story. We don't like the one we're in. We don't want to play the role that he's uniquely given us to play, and that's just a constant battle. But I love how you guys have given us a window into how he shaped your thinking to say, I'm going to run the race he has for me. I'm not going to run the race he has for somebody else that I wish were my race. That's just a place you have to get to in the Christian life if you're going to grow in your relationship with God. So what are you feeling now with, I mean, you did get pregnant from your second transfer. You're what, about 3 months or so along now?
Yes. Yeah.
So tell me, what was it like?
I just entered the second trimester last week.
Okay.
It's funny. I did not anticipate how much I would struggle with fear of miscarriage. So it was a little rough initially. It's like we took the first HCG, it was positive. The second one doubled. And I think partly the reason why I struggled with fear is because, I can still try and assert control. And there's ways in which I'm like, I don't know how to describe it. I just really struggled feeling convinced like I had miscarried. For no like really logical reason. But yeah, the first few weeks were kind of challenging. It's like, I just thought like, oh, once we get pregnant, then it'd be great. And so I don't know if that's just a result of like, you walk through 9 years. It's almost like I had gotten used to just disappointment and bad news and learned to like receive it and like trust the Lord in it. It was almost like I didn't know how to receive this gift. And so it's been kind of a journey of just like walking and just, again, open-handedness. Cause like, well, there always is the possibility that could happen. But I remember one of the sweetest things was, because we had involved community, I mean, people knew, so probably a lot of people don't do this, but like people knew the day we found out we were pregnant.
They knew we were finding out.
Because they knew we were finding out. So everybody knew. And so I remember the following week, I was actually at like a ministry planning retreat with like all of our student leaders in our college ministry. And I just remember, I'm thinking in particular, one girl that was out there and she just kept telling me, she's like, Rachel, you're a walking miracle. Or when we would have like one of our evening meetings and we were taking communion, she was like, is this your baby? This is your baby's first communion. And it just really ministered to me. Like when I was actually struggling with this belief, like, you know, and we have this first ultrasound, like this fear of like, are we going to see a little baby and a little heartbeat? It was like God was just taking care of me as I was really struggling through community of people who were like excited and like praying. And so I think it's more like, I think once we hit 9 weeks, I was like, wait, okay, I think this is really happening. So, but it's taken a while. And
Sure.
I don't think the significance of this moment has really sunk in. I think it'll take some time just to really fathom it all. So
That's beautiful. Rollin, how about you?
Yeah, no, I experienced similar things. I mean, I've told people, like, I know this isn't objectively true, but because of our experience, intuitively, I just think pregnancy doesn't work. It doesn't work. And so that the prediction emotionally is it won't work. And so even if something initially works, it will eventually not work. And like probably everybody's like this, but I, want to anticipate the possible disappointments in part so I can protect myself against the pain,
Right.
because the shock of pain feels worse than, predicted pain.
Right.
And so yeah, I felt that too. But again, if I was to kind of try to capture my sense of like even when we went to our initial ultrasounds, because it's like we had one at 6.5 weeks, 8 weeks, 9 weeks. So we had a bunch in a row. It's like we're doing this almost every week. I felt like this sense of almost like God would be saying, just receive the gift. Like almost, can you go into this with an excitement? Like, oh, I get to see our baby, as opposed to a fear, like, what if I don't? And it wasn't like a psychological trick. It wasn't like, well, just think positively. It was a real sense of like, no, just trust what I'm doing in this, and like, just receive it. And so I don't know how good of a job I did at that. I mean, I think it definitely helped me, but I definitely still struggled with the fear too. I would notice, like, after we got out of appointments, I was like, whoa, I just got hit with this huge wave of relief, which made me think I was probably in denial about how scared I was going into it. Uh, but yeah, I do think that I felt helped by the Lord in that, of just that language of like, just receive it, and kind of this sense of I'm gonna, insofar as I'm able in my weakness, go into this appointment and enjoy seeing our baby, instead of just feeling this like fear of loss. And I think we still work through that. It's
Sure.
like,
Of course you
I
will.
think like Rachel, like we were playing pickleball last night, and Rachel like ran after something really hard, and then she paused and she went, "Is the baby okay?" It's like just this immediate like fear of like, what if I did something that just is going to cost us in some, deep way. So I think we're still working through that. But I've had a sense, and again, I can say it even on this podcast and think, man, I may look like a fool for saying this, but I've had a sense like of like, oh no, I think I'm gonna hold this baby in my arms.
Mm.
And and not just because we've hit a certain mark or something like that, not because we've passed a certain threshold where the likelihoods of miscarriage are lower, because I still think, no, we know plenty of people that have miscarried
Sure.
at the point that we're at or later, and so there are no guarantees. But just a sense of like, I think that's what's going to happen. And so anyways, there's just been grace in that. I feel like we've, what Rachel's talking about with our friends. And then I just think that kind of internal work of like God in our lives, of like, oh, he's just helping us in our fear. Yeah, but I remember, maybe this is what I can end with in response to this question, is that I remember after the first ultrasound, somebody saying, have you thought about names yet? And I thought when they said that That thought has not even crossed my mind.
Yeah.
When we were a young couple, before we went through infertility, we would, fairly frequently, not like all the time, but it's like, we would have these like, what if we have kids? What are we going to name them?
Right.
And in the context of infertility, I think I can say with confidence, we probably had gone many years without having one conversation about what we would name a kid, because it felt like something that we couldn't even, what had been a source of joy or kind of a fun connection early in our marriage, dreaming about our kids, to talk about their names in the context of infertility just felt like pain. And so it literally had not even crossed my mind. Even after we had gotten a positive pregnancy test, we had gone a couple of weeks and I had not had a single thought. And it was somebody else who was like, have you thought about names? And I think it was definitely a moment of realizing, it's kind of where you integrate your own story a little more, and you kind of realize like, oh, wow, just what we had been through. And even for me realizing, wait, that actually is a scary question, because if I start thinking about names, it's like I enter into that dream space again, and that dream could be collapsed. And so, so I think it's been like, we genuinely are unbelievably excited, and yet also working through kind of this strange, complex network of emotions in it. So,
yeah. And sure, to some degree, it's going to be that way, a little bit touch and go for the next 6 months, but things are looking good now, and we're going to hope and believe for you guys as well. Our time is gone, but I just want to thank you two so much for sharing so much. It's really a sacred thing to get a window into your story like this, and I don't know that I've done one of these where there were more helpful takeaways. I think this is really going to help a lot of believers who are going through the same sorts of trials that God has had for you. So just want to thank you two so much. And please know we're going to be praying for you back here in Knoxville, and cannot wait to see a picture of that baby.
thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, we appreciate y'all.
Well, if this has been helpful to you, don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe to the podcast. That'll help get the word out. And again, if you want more information on Southeastern Fertility, it's southeasternfertility.org. I'm Mark Mellinger. This has been Hope, Faith, and Infertility.